Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast. My name is Philip Ideson, a 20-year procurement practitioner, former head of procurement and advisor to procurement leaders around the world. I started Art of Procurement to help leaders and their teams access the resources they need to increase their impact through insight-driven procurement. You are listening to our flagship podcast where we pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics and tools that leading procurement teams are using to align their impact with the needs of their business. And today I welcome Steve Wills back into the Art of Procurement studio. Steve is the founder and managing director of Procurement Central and formerly served as Procurement Advisor to the 2012 London Olympic Games Organising Committee. He has extensive business experience with blue chip organisations and has worked with leaders in industry and commerce as a CPO to transform complex procurement functions. Now, in our conversation today, Steve and I discussed the procurement brand and the strategic positioning of procurement. It's a topic often at the forefront of our minds as we continue to push to change the perception of the work that we do in procurement. And so let's go straight into the conversation. I start by asking Steve, why should we even care about the brand of procurement?
I still have this nagging voice in my mind from my mother saying, what is it you do again? What is it you do? And, that seems to reverberate still in the infamous boardroom or the corridors of power. What's procurement? What do they do? And obviously, if you ask 20 people that question, you'll get 20 different answers. And I guess, knowing you well, sometimes people will come back with a view on what procurement is. And you and I will probably go, no, it isn't. Right. So it all seems a bit sort of inconsistent. If there is a view, it's a bit inconsistent. It's a bit confusing. Knowing the good work that you do from your studio and your communication, you see a sort of a higher level. But I was reminded of this with I'm going to say coming to the end of the pandemic. I've got everything crossed for that when I say that. But coming towards the end of the pandemic, I can see us going back into cost saving. Well, I'm not even going to say cost, price saving mode. Senior people talking about price slashers and price cutters. And I'm afraid procurement functions complying with that. And I worry that the good work that the so-called strategic procurement leaders have done to raise or to define what procurement might be, will get lost. So that's why I was reminded of, what is our brand? Mm-hmm. Will people stick to it? And did we ever get the message across in the first place?
Now, do you think that it's necessary to have a brand of procurement as a profession? I mean that transcends, organizations, because bodies like SIPS, ISM here in the States, they were working on trying to position procurement at a certain level to do a certain thing that is, if they were successful, it's going to be known by everybody. And I put on the flip side of that, well, is the brand of procurement only really important the brand of your procurement organization within your team? What should we be focusing more on how procurement is perceived just on a company by company basis, or is there work for us to do as a profession to say, hey, this is what procurement should be, what you should know as procurement, everybody on the outside?
Yeah, I think the answer I would give is as a profession rather than company by company. And I think it just comes back to the point I was making that it's all different in company by company. A strong IT procurement function like financial services, where there's clearly a lot of IT spend, might have, in fact, I'm prepared to say, will have a very different view to retail procurement or to manufacturing or to other types of procurement, automotive. So I think it is at that, to your point, is at that sort of professional level. And whilst we do have professional bodies, as you've just mentioned, I still think that there's a lot needs to be done in terms of disseminating the messages through not even just, firstly, procurement functions, but also through other leaders. It just seems to me that, as I've just said, my examples that I gave you, if you ask a leader, meaning a board director, not just the CEO, they still wouldn't know what instead of brand, I'll say identity is.
Yeah.
And as I say, they'll come up with an answer, of course, price cutter, negotiator, perhaps. But in terms of the many, many different things we do, which the CIPS will cover with all their materials, I'm still hearing people say, that they don't have sort of a conclusive view in the way that they do, probably, that they could answer that for marketing or for HR or for some of the other functions in the business.
Yeah, it feels
They'll either see us as tactical or strategic. And sometimes, I believe that's our fault because we've allowed that to happen. To have a virtual, with the tools. Let's have lots of tools and have a really small procurement strategic function. And in other places, the reverse of that. And I just think that we've kind of been pushed around, and we've not set our own identity, our own brand, and we've allowed others to kind of shape us, unlike, as I've just said, HR, finance, or marketing.
Now, I always believe that it's kind of in our own hands, that it's on us. We have the potential to change the perception of procurement, which is really the same as changing the brand or the identity of procurement.
Yeah.
Ironically, we did a study in October of last year that asked for the challenges. What are procurement professionals and leaders most challenged with? And the thing that came out at the top of that list was they're struggling with the perception of procurement, which kind of frustrates me in one way, because I feel like I did this myself, which is why I can kind of speak to it earlier in my career, is you looked at that and think, nobody understands me. That's their problem. It's not my problem. But the reality is that's my problem, because we haven't set those, we either haven't talked about what we can do in a way that has resonated, but more often than not, we haven't actually delivered. And it feels like it's in the delivery to me as much as it is in setting a statement, a vision statement.
And I think that without naming names of the consultancy companies, a lot of us have also suffered from having big consultancy companies be brought in, and they've left a bad, how can I put it, taste in the mouth of the business, because savings have been claimed and then afterwards those savings have disappeared. It's always, so the brand is, if there was one, the brand, it becomes tarnished by, the big companies coming in, going through the company like a dose of salts, treading on lots of feet, and not transferring the skills and not having sustainable, passing on sustainable benefits to the business. So, you can see the damage that's been done in the chase for short-term rewards, e.g., getting paid on for cost savings. So, that's the background that we've got, and where some people are trying to do some good work in small pockets. I still think that because the CIPS have been around a heck of a lot, over 75 years. And still we get asked this question, still we get faced with, I don't know what procurement is. So hence why, as we come out of COVID, you can see we'll revert back to type and lose all of those value add things that we were starting to do.
Yeah, it's I feel like we have this opportunity to make some of the value added things that we've been able to do stick. And that's I want to talk a little bit in a moment about kind of at an organizational level of how we help make that stick within our companies. But I just want to kind of end some thoughts on the profession level. You talked about SIPs or CIPS, and there's other obviously organizations around the world who are championing procurement. But
Yeah.
like, I don't. If I say it this way, it's going to sound too harsh. But have we failed in terms of, as a profession, talking about what procurement is, and is that something that we should be looking at these professional organizations to help set the tone for, or is it something that we as individual professionals can do to champion procurement? Like, what can we do about it?
So as every good football manager and politician says, they never say they fail. They just say we'll learn from our mistakes.
Yeah.
We'll learn, when they've lost for the for the umpteenth time,
5-0.
playing the same football, and for your American colleagues, soccer, playing the same formation. So I don't think we've failed. As I say, if you look back, I think it's history is a great thing. As you look back and you see what are the things that haven't helped us. And as I've just mentioned, I think allowing other people, in some cases, that are no better qualified or unqualified to do the job, but they might have, I don't know, more confidence, more network, more influence, but they're certainly not qualified to do the job. And I think the professional bodies have evolved, probably it's fair to say, more in the, what shall we say, 5 to 7 years than they have, as I've just mentioned, in the last sort of 75, 78 years. So I think, we are making our case a lot more holistically. We're looking at all the different aspects of what makes up procurement. It is rising thanks to the professional bodies, more awareness. But I don't think we've failed per se. I just think we've been slow to get our, let's call it that, a brand, an identity that we all agree on, and then execute that in the business in a consistent way. As I say, we've all had our own agendas, we've all had our own view on what that might mean and how it might help us individually. And this is why, people saw big opportunities in the early 2000s, to go and make money out of companies on the back of these cost-saving initiatives, or offshoring, or outsourcing was and probably still is, although that's a bit debatable with coming out of COVID. But these big initiatives were just too huge an opportunity for people to ignore. And sadly, as I've said, that has left a bit of a slash and burn mentality and caused, as I've said, a bad taste in people's mouths. So let's not say we've failed, but we must learn from those lessons. And as you say, take hold of our own destiny, shall we say, and learn from the mistakes and get this identity brand clear, what it is we stand for, what it is we do, and what it is we don't do, because we sometimes jump into gaps, jump into opportunities, and we say, we'll have a bit of that, and CSR, in my opinion, has been a little bit like that. And consequently, GDPR, Modern Slavery Act, we're all jumping on these bandwagons to give us this identity. And I just think instead of being, as the cliche goes, reactive, we need to be proactive. Yeah. And that's probably what we haven't done in the past.
Yeah, meantime, we can't get our own terminology right. We talked about the language of procurement in the last podcast we did together. And, here we are in 2021, and you still see posts on LinkedIn, it seems like, every few days of people debating the difference between procurement and purchasing. And it kind of makes me tear my hair out that if we can't even agree on basic terminology, then how can anybody else outside the profession really understand what we do?
Indeed.
Now, one of the things that some of the other professions like the finance profession, accounting, HR,
Yeah.
whatever, they have some pretty standard certifications. And sometimes you have to be licensed to be able to do
Yeah.
certain positions, like in accounting. I know that the professional bodies have kind of pushed that from a procurement perspective. Do you think that there's legs in procurement professionals being licensed, so to speak, or having, a generally accepted industry education path, if that would help procurement, or is it just a marketing exercise to sell more certification programs?
So the answer I'm going to say is yes, I do. I do believe that we ought to license our practitioners, and the reason for it is that very well Peter Smith, and he did typical Peter. He did his bad buying book,
Yeah.
and I think that when you read that, and also you look at all the other case studies that are out there, there's so many costly mistakes that have been made because of I'm not going to say weak procurement, but procurement not knowing their own not boundaries exactly, but where they can operate and where they can't operate. Clarity around them of what is their limitations, where do they operate, what are their responsibilities, instead of sort of floating in and out into roles that other people think they can do better. Go shopping with the company's money. I do think that the role of procurement does need better definition. We still leave that to, as I've said, some people in the organisation to do some of the things that we claim is our, profession. And I think having that license would make it clear to companies, and also burning platforms that we've seen as you started this conversation with lessons learned from the bullwhip effect of, products that were panic buying, and then they got them to the front of the store, and then people stopped panic buying, and all that kind of silly behavior. I think having procurement people in organizations that are clearly licensed to do the job would set the tone. It would set the roles and responsibilities. I worked for the Olympic Games, and that was shall we say, a newly set up organisation. Yes, it was a project for a limited period of time, but because it was brand new, shall we call it a greenfield site, it was set up in a way that everyone knew what procurement did, and they did. It was a no-go area for them. So there was none of this. Oh, I'll go shopping. I'll have a chat with a supplier over lunch. I'll take advantage of their corporate hospitality and get to know. There was none of that. Because it was a very transparent organisation and it was a very new organisation, everyone was very clear on it. So the answer to your question is yes, I do. And I think that would help everybody to avoid, as Peter in his book says, avoid the mistakes of the past.
Yeah.
You have scope creepage, you have budgets which are out of control, and as I say, specifications that go haywire. I think it would help all of that and pull that into line.
So, as we think about internal within our organizations and the brand of an internal procurement group, I just want to kind of carry over. You said about the Olympics and it being a greenfield site. Do you think being a greenfield site helped in that nobody had any prior expectation on what anybody's roles and responsibilities were, because everything was kind of new? And I wonder if that's the case. Like, what can we do? What are some of the things that you saw there that we can bring into an established procurement group to kind of reset those expectations of what procurement does and what procurement doesn't do?
I'm going to say something which is probably slightly controversial here, but the procurement usually are not directly into the chief exec, but they're into one of the other board directors. And because the board director, commercial director at the Olympics, absolutely knew what procurement stood for, he brought in somebody that was actually a previous president of SIPS, as it happens. And that really, by knowing as a commercial director or a finance director, by having your procurement skill, by having a set of procurement skills and not just delegating that and just, leaving that to somebody else, really made it very clear to people what was on the procurement agenda and what wasn't. So, the old adage of top down really applied in that case, but you could see it was very clear, and you could see at the top they really got what procurement was. They came along and they supported procurement at what they called deal approval groups. They gave their signature to procurement. They supported them. It wasn't the case that procurement lost it. As so often we see that somebody was probably better networked or had more influence in the business and they were, given the green light over procurement. Procurement got the board backing that it deserved, and that really made a difference in terms of being able to, do their job. But obviously, the same applies. They weren't really able to go off into new territories, as I've mentioned, things that weren't their responsibility, and try to do something in those areas. It was, this is your job and this is your role and this is your area. And that was clear to everybody.
Now, when I think about what is a brand, a brand is essentially what people who use your service feel about you. It's something that's in their words, it's not yours. So it's based on the experience they have in working with you and what you do for them and how they interact and all those things. And there's lots of things from a marketing perspective that we can do. And maybe we'll touch on those in a moment to increase the brand that you have as a procurement group. But where my mind always goes to is, in the startup world, you talk a lot about product market fit. So, the experimentation of making sure that what you do is actually what your stakeholders are in startups, what your customers want from you. And I feel like that's kind of fundamental to anything we try and do internally from a procurement brand is, are we actually providing a service that the business wants or needs? And I just wonder if you have any advice on how we can maximize the chances that the solutions that we're ultimately providing to our business are those the business want. And especially in those organizations where there's a deep skepticism on what procurement is. So it's not necessarily, you can't just go and ask necessarily. You have to get in front of people who truly don't want to be having a conversation because they've already dismissed you based on some preconceived ideas.
Yeah, and I guess that it's a case of getting in front of the people that do want to listen to you and do want to give you a backing. As you say, no, unfortunately, there's no leader. There's no such thing as a perfect organization, and no leader is universally loved. There's always going to be somebody who doesn't, as you say, doesn't want them or doesn't believe in them. So I guess you've got to get to the people you can get to and win those over. But the point is that there are, going back to bad buying, there are enough examples where we've seen things go out of control and where things are delivered late, things are delivered more expensively, and consequently, because of that, there has been failure. And we've seen this, as you correctly said, in the pandemic, and we've seen where perhaps supplier management hasn't been as good as it should have been over time, and consequently preferential treatment or treating people in a partnership way has not happened, and consequently they haven't got been at the front of the line for goods and services.
Mhm.
So, these things, we can see them, as you correctly said. Now is the time for procurement to stand up and be counted, because we've seen how procurement should have prevented a number of things, or the supply chain certainly should have prevented a number of the risks that have happened, that have caused failure, high severity. And I think, now is the time to remind companies of how expensive and how much of a failure and a disaster not having procurement in an organization could be. And I think, instead of just saying, we're good for business, if you don't invest in procurement and supply chain, you will run the risk. And it really comes back to that, doesn't it? Risk assessment. You
Yeah.
will run the risk of, when the next pandemic comes, and there will be another one, when the next, financial disaster occurs. You will have wanted to invest it in procurement, to choose the right suppliers and the right supplier relationship partnerships, to have avoided whatever the next bump in the highway is.
Yeah, it's there's lots of examples that can be cited
So
now
many, yeah.
to say what happens if you don't. Um, I feel like kind of the missing link in a lot of organizations is, where procurement has tried and not necessarily being successful. There's that skepticism of, well, procurement didn't do this for me, or they didn't do that, or I had a better experience. And, that may not be on procurement, that may be on the stakeholder, or it could be on, procurement and how procurement worked with them. I feel like we have to, we can go in and we can talk about what procurement can do for you and how, I take that back. I don't like talking about what you can do for you. It's because that assumes that we know what the stakeholder wants. Understanding what the stakeholder wants and being able to provide a value prop that supports them, but then we got to show it. We got to demonstrate it. And actually, once you demonstrate it, that this time it's different, because every single time you go to a stakeholder, you hear them saying, well, we've tried this before and we had bad experiences, so why should we believe you this time? Once you get that over that initial hurdle of showing them that this time it is different, then that gets the trust, and that allows you to do lots of really interesting things around brand, which is the vision, the messaging, the style, the language, like creating style guides, things like that, thinking about your positioning. You can do all those things once you've kind of got over the hurdle of skepticism that I don't think you can do anything, or you're just kind of putting lipstick on the pig, to use a phrase.
Yes. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And but the same is true throughout. I'm skeptical of marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I see so much money being spent, and it's very difficult to know where, really, is that the secret of our company's success, because we did a TV ad, or because we did some poster campaign. So I'm skeptical of so many, or you can be. I clearly have put my cards on the table there with marketing, but you can be very skeptical of everybody in an organization. But the point is, if it's done well, as you say. If it's done badly, then obviously not. But all the things have to happen systematically. You have to have the right type of people in procurement, and we haven't always had that.
Right.
We haven't had the right leaders, have we? We haven't had the right leaders that are confident to be able to hold not an argument, but to hold a conversation with an ops director, a great big ops director, in the plant, who believes that they know best. And as you say, the history, the background, recent history is littered with examples of how it's gone wrong, based on, if I may say, someone's arrogance or someone bullying somebody else. So it all starts with knowing our subject, knowing our parameters, knowing what we should be doing, and being confident to execute on that. and really pointing out that if the business want to go, shall we call it, their own way, that generates risks.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the risks. And these days you can back that up with lots of examples where, as I've said, things have happened late, things have happened, budgets have been doubled or trebled, and consequently reputation has suffered. So, you're not just there to, as I said at the beginning, to pay less for something. It's a whole criteria of things that procurement have to manage and manage successfully. And of course, you're right, it is always, whether they've had no experience of procurement or not, it is always going to be winning over people, because I'm afraid we live in a very cynical world.
Yeah.
So we have to be strong leaders, we have to know our subject, and we have to have some experience to be able to execute on that.
Well, Steve, I want to thank you for your time today talking about the brand of
Always
procurement.
A pleasure.
I think that it needs work, obviously, in terms of what people's perception of procurement is. But the more that we do, I think at a ground level, the more that ultimately generates, changing perceptions, and people take those perceptions from company to company.
Yeah.
Oftentimes you go somewhere and said, "Oh, my old company procurement did X, and therefore that's how I see it." Like you talked about, like the commercial lead for the Olympics already knew what procurement could do, and so there wasn't that skepticism. And then the more people that kind of have that perspective, the easier it becomes. If folks like to reach out and get in touch, what would be the easiest way for them to go and do that?
Procurementcentral.co.uk is who we are. And you can find us obviously on the wonderful thing is the World Wide Web.
Yep.
So procurementcentral.co.uk, and Steve Wills is on LinkedIn. So please do reach out to me. I'd love to hear from people.
Great. Well, what I'll do is I'll include the links to both of those in our show notes.
Thanks very much.
So anybody who's listening can find the show notes for today's episode and all the podcasts at Art of Procurement by just going to artofprocurement.com/podcast. That's artofprocurement.com/podcast. Steve, one last time, thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the summer.
Thank you very much. And you, and best wishes to you and your family.
Thank you, Steve. I want to thank you for listening into today's episode of The Art of Procurement. To go deeper, including access to transcripts and actionable outtakes from the podcast, join the free level of our AOP Mastermind community. To learn more, go to artofprocurement.com/mastermind. And to find our entire back catalogue of almost 400 episodes, go to artofprocurement.com/podcast.